In this video, let us see how to connect a Java application to the database using Hibernate. So, we are going to build a Hibernate application. These are the steps that we will be following now. First is we need to create a Maven project. Let us give the name of the project as demo project. We need to add the dependencies to pom.xml. The dependencies are Hibernate jars and the database jars. Here we are working with Oracle, so we need to add jdbc6.jar. Next is we need to add the Hibernate configuration file. This is going to have the details relevant to the database. This has to be added inside src main resources. Once we have done the configuration part, inside src main java, we need to create the Java bean that has to be saved in the database. Say for example, if it is employee, we need to create the employee class with the appropriate instance variables, getter setter methods and toString. Then we need to give the mapping details. The mapping details can be given in the form of annotations. So we have seen few annotations like @entity, @id, @column. Once we have added the annotations, the next step is we need to create a session factory object. For creating a session factory object, we need to create a separate class. The name of the class can be anything, but I prefer to keep it as Hibernate Util. This is like a utility class. Once the session factory is ready, you create a main code to persist the Java object to the database. Persist in the sense save the Java object into the database. So let me just show the flow and then we will go back to Eclipse to do this. So creating a Maven project, adding the dependencies in pom.xml, we will be working with Hibernate Core 5.4 and we are using Oracle database. Then we need to create the Hibernate configuration file. This has to be added in src main resources. We need to create the employee class with the appropriate annotations. Then the Hibernate util to create the session factory, and finally the main class from where you will be saving the Java object into the database. Let us start it now. Let me create a Maven project. You can do it from here or go to File, New, Maven project. Select Create a Simple Project. Click Next. The group ID is com.srishti.dist. dist is distribution. This is the place where the jar file will be created in case if you are creating a jar file. The artifact ID is the project name, so it is demo project. Packaging is jar. Leave the rest of the fields as blank and click finish. Now the application is getting created. Let me open pom.xml. This is the place where we need to add the dependencies. So let us go to the browser and get Hibernate dependency. Search for Hibernate Maven dependency. Select the first search result. So go down. Always get the dependency which is downloaded very often. So let me just go down. So here you can see 5.4.2 final. Select this. Copy it. The moment you keep the cursor, it gets copied. Come back to Eclipse. After version, you need to add one more tag. Dependencies, inside which you need to add Hibernate dependency. The next dependency that you need to add is Oracle. Oracle dependency is not available in Maven repository, but still if you search in the browser, you will get the dependency details. That is dependency, group ID, artifact ID and version. You can copy it to pom.xml. Automatically the path will be created in .m2 repository, but that ojdbc6.jar file is not available in Maven repository. So inside that path, it is your duty that you need to copy ojdbc6.jar file and add it to .m2 repository. This part of adding Oracle jar file to .m2 repository I have explained in another video. You can check that out. Now I have already done that. So let me add the dependency. Okay, fine. One more thing is when you are working with Maven, it automatically works only with J2SE 1.5. Here I want to work with 1.8. So for that we need to add properties. Add properties inside which we need to give Maven dot compiler dot target is 1.8. Same is the case for source. Maven dot compiler dot source, that also is 1.8. After you have done this, you need to update your project. Then automatically Maven will change to 1.8. Anyways, if you are going to change it in the build path, it will change to 1.8. But whenever you are updating your project, it will rechange to 1.5. That is why we are modifying it in pom.xml. Select your project, right click Maven, update project, force update of snapshots, click OK. Now it is changed automatically to 1.8. Now let us move on to the next step. We need to create the configuration file. Select src main resources, right click, new, other, search for Hibernate. Here we have got the Hibernate configuration file. Click next. The file name should be hibernate.cfg.xml only. Click next. Here, no need to give any name for session factory. We need to specify the database dialect, the driver class name, URL, username and password. There are two ways of doing it. The first way is you can go and select it from the drop down. The other way is you can get the values from connection. Let me show you both the ways. The first one is database dialect. Go and select Oracle, Oracle 10G. The driver class name has to be oracle.jdbc.driver.oracle driver. The connection URL. So here we have got the second one. It should not be ORCL, it is XE. And then give the username as system. And password, the password that you have got for your Oracle database. This is one way. One other way is if you are not selecting anything here. Already we have configured Oracle to Eclipse. So in that scenario, it is set up. So go and get values from connection. When you select this, it will ask for the connection profile. We have given the name as new Oracle. When we added Oracle to Eclipse, this was the name that we have given. Select it. Click OK. Automatically it will fill in the values. So this is an easier way. If you have configured Oracle to Eclipse, this is the easier way. If you have not configured Oracle to Eclipse, not an issue at all. You have to go and select it from the drop down every time. Then select create a console configuration. Click next. This is the Hibernate console configuration. The purpose of this console configuration is if you want to see the details about this particular run, if you want to see whether the session factory is created properly, what are the transactions. So in that scenario, you can just see all those details relevant to Hibernate from this configuration. Click finish. Now your CFG file is getting ready. It's created. In the bottom you have got session factory, security and source. Go to source. So the details that we have added is given over here. Hibernate configuration. The property is Hibernate connection driver class. What we have added? Oracle jdbc.oracle driver. If you are working with MySQL, then you need to give MySQL driver name. The password is system. The username is system. The URL, whatever we have given. The dialect is Oracle. It is mandatory that you need to select the appropriate dialect. Only then Hibernate can convert it into the appropriate SQL statement. If you are working with Oracle, it has to convert it into Oracle SQL queries. If you are working with MySQL, it has to convert it into MySQL statements. This is not completed. Still more we need to add. Go to session factory. We are doing it from the UI directly. By this way we are avoiding mistakes. Select properties. Open it. Here you have got Hibernate. In Hibernate, what are the properties that we are going to add? The first property is show SQL. It has to be true. What is the purpose of this? Whenever we are doing a Hibernate application, we are using the methods on session, session.save, session.save or update. I want to know the equivalent SQL query that is getting generated. So I have given show SQL as true. So Hibernate will generate the SQL query and it will display it in the console. The next property that we are going to add is HPM to DDL auto. Hibernate mapping to data definition language. Here it has got few options. Validate, forget about validate, update, create and create drop. you are informing Hibernate whether you want to create a table on every run or create the table on the run. Once the connection is getting close, drop the table, or update. In case of update, you check whether the table is there. If the table is not there, create a table and update it. If the table is already there, just update the table. So we are going to select update. So these are the two properties that you need to add under Hibernate. Let me go back to the source. So we have added two more properties, hibernate.show_SQL true, hibernate.hpm to ddl auto update. Now let us move on to create the entity class. Go to src main java, right click, new class. Let me give the package name. The package name has to be com.srishti.training. The class name has to be employee. Click finish. Now let me add three instance variables. Private string name, private int employee id, private string city. Let us add getter setter methods, generate, and go to source, generate toString. Remember, if you feel that you want to have a parameterized constructor, you also should add a default constructor. If you are having just the parameterized constructor, your application will fail because internally Hibernate will try to create an employee object for few methods. If there is no default constructor, Hibernate cannot create the employee object. So that is mandatory. Okay, now let us move on to add the annotations. The first annotation is @entity. This is a very important annotation. Only if you add this particular annotation, Hibernate will save this object of employee into a database row. Let me import it. While importing, you need to import it from javax.persistence. Don't import from org.hibernate. It has to be imported from javax.persistence.entity. The second import, whatever you are seeing, is deprecated. You are seeing a cross on that. Click finish. Now, in this case, this employee class is my entity. With what name the table will be created? The table will be created with the same name as that of the entity. If you feel that you want to create a different name, then you need to go and add the annotation @table, within which you can give a different name, Hib employee. Let me import this also, javax.persistence.table. So all the annotations should be imported from javax.persistence API. Next, when you are working with Hibernate, it is mandatory that we need to add @Rate Id Annotation. Let me add that. Import that @Rate Id. What about the column names? If you want to have the same column names as that of the properties, you can leave it as such. If you want to give a different column name, then you can add @column annotation. I don't want to have it as name. I want to have it as emp_name. So let me go and add @column annotation, within which name equal to emp_name. So in the employee class, the properties are name, employee ID and city. But in the table, it will be emp_name, emp ID and city. Let us import this. If you see here, in @column annotations, there are few more attributes. Let me just give control space. You can see whether it is insertable, whether you are allowing insertions for this particular column. What should be the length of this particular column? Whether this column will accept null values. By default, it is true. You can see on the right hand side, everything is shown over here. What is mandatory? Name is mandatory. If you don't want to give a different name, then you don't have to use @column annotation. If you want to give the length for your column, that also is possible with the help of length. The default length will be 255. If you want to give a length, you can also give that. Length equal to 20. So these are the details that is needed for this entity class. Now let us revisit this configuration file. The purpose of visiting this configuration file is I need to add the mapping details to this configuration file. So go to session factory, select mappings, click add. You need to add the entity class to this mapping details. Go and browse, search for employee, click OK and click finish. Now this will be added. Let me go to source. So here you can see mapping class equal to com.srishti.training.employee. If you are using an XML file, it will come as mapping resources equal to the XML file name. Here we are working with the annotation, so you need to give the complete path, that is the fully qualified class name of this entity class. So the configuration file is done, the entity class is done. The next step is we need to add the Hibernate Util class. So select com.srishti.training, right click new class. The class name has to be Hibernate Util. Inside this, we are going to create a session factory object. So let us have it as static session factory. The purpose of creating it as static is I need only one copy and it has to be singleton. Static session factory. Now inside the static block, we need to get a session factory object. So for that we need to use a standard service registry. So there are a few set of lines which you need to follow as such. You can directly go into JBoss site and you can get the details. Let me show you how this can be done. Standard service registry equal to, so with the help of this registry I am going to read the Hibernate configuration file. Only from the Hibernate configuration file we can connect to the database. With the help of that we can get a session factory object. So this is equal to new standard service registry builder dot configure within double quotes, pass the Hibernate configuration file hibernate.cfg.xml .build. So what actually is happening, using the standard service registry builder we are building a registry by reading the data from hibernate cfg.xml file. The next step is, from reading that we need to get the mapping class details. So that can be achieved with the help of metadata sources. Metadata source equal to new metadata sources by passing the registry. It means from the registry you are going to read the metadata details, that is the mapping details. The purpose of this metadata sources is to get the mapping details from the Hibernate configuration file. Let me keep the cursor here, you can just have a look. It is an entry point into working with the sources of metadata information. That is, it can be the XML file or annotation. The metadata sources are nothing but the classes that are annotated with @ entity. Now we need to read the annotations. So for that we are going in for another class called as metadata. Metadata equal to, from the metadata source you build the metadatas. So let me just keep the cursor here, you will understand it. It is trying to get all the metadata details, @ entity, @ column, @id, @embedded id, whatever annotations are there, that will be collected by this metadata. Now using this metadata you are going to get an object of session factory. So it is factory equal to metadata dot build session factory. So to put it in simple words, using the registry builder we are creating a registry. This registry is going to have the details of the configuration file. By reading the configuration file we are trying to get the metadata sources, that is the classes that are annotated with @ entity or the XML mapping files. In our case it is the classes that are annotated with @ entity. From the metadata sources we are trying to read the metadata details, @ id, @ column, @ embedded id, whatever annotations that we have given in that class. Using the metadata we are building the session factory. So the moment this Hibernate Util class is called, it will create a session factory object. Now I need to give the session factory object to the other classes. So for that purpose let us create a static method, public static session factory. The return type is session factory and let us give the method name as get session factory. It's our own user defined method, return factory. So using the static block we are creating a session factory object, and using get session factory method we are returning the factory object. So this Hibernate Util is used for creating one single instance of session factory. Now let us create the main class. Let me go to com.srishti.training, create new class, give the class name as emp main, select public static void main, click finish. Now let us write the code to persist our employee object. So first let me create an employee object, employee emp equal to new employee. emp.setName, emp.setCity, emp.setEmployee ID. Now the next step is we need to get the session factory. So it is session factory equal to, we can get the session factory object from the Hibernate Util class. That is a static method. So call it using Hibernate Util dot get session factory. Session factory has to be imported. Whatever you are importing here should be from org.hibernate. Let me import it. org.hibernate.session factory. Using the session factory, let us open a session. Factory.open session. It returns a session object. Now, using the session object, begin the transaction. The method is begin transaction. The return type is transaction. While importing transaction, you have to be very careful. You also get one another import of javax.transaction. Let me show you. When I keep the cursor, there are two imports. Don't select the first import, select the second one. So it is org.hibernate.transaction. So we have got the factory object. Using the factory, we have opened the session. Using the session, we have begun the transaction. The next step is, let us call the method on session. Session.save, pass the employee object, that is emp. When you call session.save, after saving the object to the database, it returns the primary key of that object. In our case, the primary key is employee ID. The data type is int. So we can get it as integer emp id equal to session.save. The return type of session.save is serializable. So we need to downcast it to integer. Then let us print it. Inserted id plus emp id. Then transaction.commit. Only if you call this line, the data will be saved to the table, or else everything will be done but the data will not be committed to the database. After committing, session.close. That's it. So we have completed everything. Let us do a cross check. First is hibernate.cfg.xml. Here you got session factory name equal to. You please remove this name equal to, or else it will throw an exception. The reason being, this name is looking in for a JNDI name. We are not working with JNDI. If you don't remove it, you will get no initial context exception. To avoid that, you need to remove it. So we have given all the details that is relevant to Hibernate. We have also added the appropriate mapping class. Then is the employee.java. We have annotated with @entity that the table name should be hibemployee. Then we have created Hibernate Util, with the help of which we are returning a session factory object. In emp main, first we are getting the session factory from Hibernate Util, opening the session, beginning the transaction, saving the employee object, and then finally committing the transaction and closing the session. Now let us run this application. Let me open the console. I'll maximize the console. See, nicely it is showing all the details. Using the driver oracle.jdbc.oracle driver at URL jdbc:/oracle thin localhost. It's giving all the details. The connection properties, auto commit mode is false. What is the connection pool? How many connections are allowed? In case of Hibernate, 20. Then what is the dialect we are using? Oracle 10G dialect. All the details that you have added in the configuration XML file is checked first, and then because we have given update, first it is creating the table. Create table hibemployee, employee ID, city varchar, employee name. In case of employee name, we also gave the length as 20, so it is accepting only 20 characters. The primary key is employee ID, and the inserted ID is 10. Insert into hibemployee, city, employee name, and employee ID. Guys, city and employee ID, I have not changed the property name. So the column name is same as that of the property name. In case of the property name, we have given the column name as emp_name. That is reflected here. Okay. Now let us check whether it is added in the table. Go to Data Source Explorer. Select Tables. Right click, refresh. Open it. Let me scroll down. Here, hibemployee, columns, employee name, city, and employee ID. Select hibemployee, right click, data, edit. So employee ID is 10, city is Bangalore, employee name is Joe. So we have built a simple Hibernate application. Using Hibernate, we have inserted one Java object into the database table. That's it.